the M2 Pro MacBook Pro is still one of the best to use MacBooks to buy right now. The MacBook is quite literally the best laptop I've ever got my hands on. I mean, the build is so sleek thanks to its unibody design, and trust me, you will feel it. It's a way better feeling than holding any typical Windows laptop, and it feels way more sturdier wherever you hold it. Also, when typing on this MacBook, some people will find the corners to be a bit uncomfortable due to the sharp edges, but I don't notice it. However, people who wear bracelets might have a problem. Now, I can't say too much about the exterior of this laptop, but what about the interior? Does this perform good? Or is it outdated compared to the M4 generation? So now let's dive into what you're going to be looking at most on a laptop. The screen. This is a Liquid Retina XDR mini LED display with a 1000 nits base brightness going up to 1600 nits in outdoor sunlight, finishing off with this 120Hz ProMotion refresh rate. And yes, this is the best display I've ever used. I mean, I'm using an IPS panel in my setup. So yeah, colours are vibrant, blacks are actually black and not that washed out grey you'll typically find on one of these monitors. And this notch does not annoy me. I'm not sure why people make such a big deal out of it. Also, on the topic of displays, it can support two 6K displays at 60Hz while keeping the internal display at full native resolution using two Thunderbolt 4 cables, or one Thunderbolt display at 6K 60Hz and another display at 4K 144Hz over its HDMI 2.1 port, or 4K at 240Hz over HDMI 2.1. Okay, so how does it perform? Surely it must be good if it can push that much pixels for an external display. It's pretty comparable to my 12th Gen i7 PC. See, because Apple constructs a GPU CPU memory into one chip, it means it can communicate way faster than a traditional desktop computer. So let's say the memory in this computer can do about 96 GB per second bandwidth, but the GPU in there can do about 504 GB per second. Surely with the MacBook's 200 GB per second memory bandwidth, this should smoke it? Well, if anything, the MacBook is faster. The PC has two separate pools of memory that have to talk to each other through a bridge. One, your system RAM, that holds your video files. The second is your graphics card, that processes all of the heavy effects. Every time you edit a frame, the CPU has to copy data from system RAM, send it across the motherboard into the GPU, let the GPU process it, and then send it all the way back. However, even though the GPU is incredibly fast, moving data back and forth between these two separate pools creates a slight delay. The MacBook doesn't use two separate pools. The CPU and GPU are on the exact same chip and share one single pool of memory, which is unified memory. A single fast pool of RAM used by everything. So, since the Mac pulls video data into the shared pool, if the GPU needs to apply an effect, it doesn't copy anything. It just looks at the exact same spot in memory that the CPU was just using. There is zero travel time. But raw performance, I mean, you're competing against a 4070 Super and a 12th Gen Intel i7. The raw power will easily crush this little chip when it comes to final export times or rendering. However, because of the Mac's zero travel time, means it literally requires less effort to feel completely smooth and lag free when you are actively scrubbing through a timeline. You would also have to know that this M2 Pro chip only uses 47 watts at maximum load, about 20 watts just for the CPU. Alright, you can have all the bandwidth you want, but what if your RAM gets full? Is the SSD inside this computer fast enough to handle memory swap? Yeah, trust me, you won't notice it. Apple manages its RAM so good compared to Windows. Plus, macOS barely takes RAM just sitting on idle. Anyway, the biggest problem MacBook users had in the past were the lack of ports. Well, they're here. An SD card slot that supports UHS 2 speeds, 3 Thunderbolt 4 ports, a 3.5mm headphone jack that can power high impedance headphones, and last, the HDMI 2.1 port. Oh yeah, MagSafe. By the way, the Thunderbolt ports can also be used to charge this MacBook. It's also got Wi-Fi 6E, so if you have a Wi-Fi 6E or 7 router, This Mac can achieve zero interference with anything that's using a 2.4 or 5 GHz signal if you are using that Wi-Fi 6E or more. And it's got Bluetooth 5.3 for increased range and speed. And security, of course. Also, if you're wondering about thermals, Macs like to delay their fan from running until it gets noticeably hot. Even then, it only runs at about 2,500 RPM. Battery life will last 2 days on average for me. With heavy load like video editing for example, it will last around 4 to 6 hours, but you do have to remember it still delivers full performance the whole way. And then charging this M2 Pro 14-inch MacBook takes about 1.5 hours with the 67-watt adapter it came with. So this MacBook I think is very worth it if you buy it in 2026, because if you think about it, every generation of Apple Silicon has been a very incremental upgrade, but the jump from Intel to Apple Silicon was a game changer. The only way I would see an upgrade is if you have an M1 chip and you get the M4 or the M5 chip. However, this M2 Pro chip is still holding on strong and will for another 3 to 5 years, or maybe more.